Hello, Holly.
We haven't done one of these in a while, have we?
No.
I think the last one was I was in New Zealand, wasn't I? We did Kathleen's.
Yeah, from your bathroom or laundry.
The converted bathroom into an office,
Yeah.
which still
Sorry,
has the
that's right.
bathroom fan.
If you put a computer in it, you thereby convert it.
Exactly. Yeah, and I remember when we finished that, we were planning to do heaps more, like, but I think Helen Joyce's was next on the list, right? And then the book never arrived, or my hard copy just arrived, and yours still hasn't.
Yeah, I'm still waiting.
Yeah,
We are going to do them though.
we are. Yeah, but that's our explanation of the lengthy gap between
Yes.
videos. So we decided to do one today to talk about this book, Amia Srinivasan's. Oh, look at Kate's because it's the right way round. The right to sex. Um, why did we want to talk about this book on our Rad Fem channel?
Well, I think it promises, perhaps not explicitly, to be a rad fem book, right? Or a revival of rad fem theory, or a reminder of that theory.
What made you hope or think that?
I'll read the first or the second paragraph from the preface. Feminism begins with a woman's recognition that she is a member of a sex class, that is, a member of a class of people assigned to an inferior social status on the basis of something called sex, a thing that is said to be natural, pre-political, and objective material ground on which the world of human culture is built.
Yeah, good.
And then she goes on to identify the second sense of the term sex, right? Sexual relations, implicating sexuality in women's oppression,
Yeah,
which is also, I think, central to radical feminist theory.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Good. No, you're right. That the two words sex class or
mm,
sex caste, right, will give a very strong signal that that's going to be in the radical feminist sort of tradition of theory.
yeah,
Nonetheless, we neither of us really found by the end of the book that it was, right?
no, and I suppose it's not her aim. She's not trying to write a radical feminist book,
Yeah,
although she does seem to have been strongly influenced by radical feminist ideas.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, I think that the essay that resulted in the book is The Right to Sex, right?
yeah.
Or perhaps I'm wrong about that.
No, that's right. The first one.
And and what she wants to talk about in that essay is the political formation of desire,
Yeah,
which
yeah. And she explicitly says that like feminists at an earlier time talked about this idea and took it seriously, right? But then it kind
yeah,
of dropped out of the picture.
that's right.
And she what's it called? Name checks. What's the when it's not pejorative? I know name dropping, but whatever, name checking or something. Where she mentions a lot of the rad femmes
Yeah,
throughout the various essays, right? So there's some sense in which
yeah,
she's at least drawing on or inspired by.
yeah. Grace Atkinson, Dworkin, McKinnon.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Good. So it's a popular book. A lot of people are reading it and talking about it. So she herself maybe isn't a rad femme, but there's some rad femme influence or promise. And so I guess we just thought it's interesting to talk about from our rad femme perspective what we make of the ideas in the book. Is that
yeah, yeah. And it maybe is an invitation or gives us an opportunity to talk about some rad fem ideas.
yeah, yeah, and stress the points of disagreement maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah, cool. And I thought we could say something before we started about how we'll approach the book, because she is an academic philosopher at Oxford, and we're both academic philosophers, and there's certain ways that we might normally talk about it, another book of philosophy, but I think we had sort of decided, or it would seem fair, that it's clearly a popular book aimed
yeah,
at being really accessible. Maybe it's supposed to, maybe the intention is that this would be some people's first experience of feminism, and that kind of non-fiction feminist category. So we're not going to like
yeah.
be
Criticize it for lack of scholarly rigor or something like that.
yeah, exactly. And
Yeah,
I mean, maybe that's important for anyone who's watching, because standard academic analytic philosophy would have a certain sort of structure, right? Like you would always have
yeah,
a very clear argument for a particular conclusion in any chapter or essay, and these essays, they're not really like that. So did you write that down? She had the little thing about the persuading.
Yeah, she says, I think this captures quite well the sort of the feel of the book. In these essays, I attempt to dwell where necessary in discomfort and ambivalence. So I think they really are quite ambivalent. She's almost never, I think, clearly arguing for a position.
Yeah, but raising certain issues for discussion or asking certain questions.
Yeah. And raising things that feminists on all sides should, she thinks, consider.
Yep. Yeah. So she goes on there, right, about these essays. I've written them to be read, blah, blah, blah. They're not intended to convince or persuade anyone of anything. And that sort of stands out to it. As a work of philosophy, that would be odd.
Yeah. Although, I want to say even as a work of feminism, I think that's odd.
Yeah, okay.
But I mean, perhaps that's unfair. Perhaps not every feminist work has to
But they tend to, don't they? They tend to have a very strong line that they're advancing, even if they're exploratory, right? So much of the second wave is we're sort of desperately trying to figure things out, and you get that sense from the books, but they are still trying to put clear claims on the table and defend it, right? So
because they are trying to pursue something.
Yeah.
Women's liberation.
Yeah. So it is distinctive in that respect, that it's deliberately not doing that.
And she does say at the end of the preface, she says, at its best, feminist theory discloses the possibilities for women's lives that are latent in women's struggles, drawing those possibilities closer. So you might think that this book should have to draw those possibilities closer.
Yeah.
Although perhaps it's not a work of feminist theory, it's more feminist musings or...
Yeah. There are some bits, and I guess we'll get to this in some chapters, where she kind of gets close to making a more concrete, because I think once we get to the castralism chapter, for example, she sort of has a bit of a vision of anti-punishment, anti-state power.
Yes, no, you're right.
It's like a sketch of, I think sometimes in a few of the essays, the anti-criminal solutions to prostitution.
Yeah.
So maybe it's more like there's lots of ambivalence, there's lots of open questions for you, the reader, to take away, and then there's like a little gesturing it.
I think you're right, though. I think an overarching point is that feminists should not pursue women's liberation through the state.
Yeah. I think that definitely, especially by the end of the last few essays, right, becomes really clear. Okay, cool. I think that was all our early things we wanted to cover, right? We've been doing a reading group about this, and we won't name our co-conspirators, but maybe sometimes when we're talking it'll come up like, oh, that came up in the reading group. So Kate and I are coming out of that to do a sort of overall wrap-up reflection. So we had really good conversations in that group about maybe 3 of the chapters in particular, so we'll probably spend a bit more time on those, but we'll go through all of them. So the first is called The Conspiracy Against Men. Here's my... So we said there's not usually an overall argument, so sometimes it can be quite a challenge to summarize what was that chapter about. So here's my attempt, and you can tell me if you think that's fair. Something like, question, when we #believe women, which men does that harm? That's my gloss of what the sort of question of the chapter was.
Yeah, I think that sounds pretty good.
Okay, good.
Or it captures what stood out to me.
Okay,
in the chapter.
Because there's a lot that chapter maybe almost more than any other, or maybe just because we started with that one, and there was a lot of anecdotal stuff, right, about various men, and it was a bit hard to track what it was being put forward for.
Yeah.
But there was that case that I thought was really interesting, which we maybe talked about quite a bit in the reading group, I'm forgetting the guy's name now, but the Ghanaian university student, for me that was the sort of most interesting case that she presented in the chapter, and that was supposed to be sort of to start raising this question about systems that condition the way that women approach or think about sex, right? So in the case, I'm forgetting all the details. It's like the guy and her hooked up in a dorm room, and she sort of went along with things quite a bit, but she tried to verbalize, I'm not that comfortable, I probably want to go, but she was still physically...
She caught herself during it, or realized she was quite high and said, to be clear, I don't want to have sex.
Yeah. And he agreed, right? He didn't push her, but I think there was something slightly difficult towards the end where she kept saying she wanted to leave but still kissing him, and then maybe he grabbed her arm or something, or said, maybe he said, oh, you should give me a minute to convince you otherwise, or something like that. Something like that, exactly. So she ended up leaving, but then she decided that it had been a sexual assault, right? And so that was quite interesting in the sense that she then pursued that case. He was heavily sanctioned by the university, but then eventually he sued the university and he got a settlement. And I think is that fair? All that was sort of going to this question of like, it can't just be consent. That's the red line for when an interaction is acceptable, because surely that woman was at least onto something when she pointed out that like she felt compelled to go through with it or go along with it, or
partly that, and wasn't it also partly that that we should see the university's treatment here as what indicative of the state's treatment, or as mirroring that, and we should be suspicious about how these institutions will. We shouldn't think of them as feminist tools.
Yeah, good. Right, because they really did actually just come down on her side, didn't they? Like, he was banned from campus and...
Oh, yes. Although that's interesting, isn't it? Because when you put it like that, it sounds like, well, it was a feminist tool, right? But hashtag believed her.
Yeah.
But I suppose with some of it, because Srinivasan wants to really emphasize his ethnicity there, right?
Yeah.
And say, well, who are these systems punishing in the end?
Yeah.
It's always the man. It's always the man at the bottom.
That's right. And I can't remember. There's another essay where that comes up again, right? Maybe it's the final essay, where like the way that when we believe women, or the way that we punish certain transgressions against feminism, hurts certain men more than others, and we should, if we care about the marginalized, we should be caring about that.
I felt like that came through more in this chapter, because later on when she talks about that, you could see her as having that worry because of the results for women. So if the Indian men gang rapists are put in jail, their wives will lose what income they have. But in this case, it wasn't clear that what the consequences were for a woman or for women, right? She was just making the point, who's the man being punished?
Yeah, although I don't know how much, there was some room for doubt about how much the ethnicity was supposed to weigh, right? I remember really picking up on that, and the fact that she did mention it, right? So it's not just this straightforward case of like, oh, men, because here's one simple reading, right? Oh, men are taught to be really blasé about sex. They don't understand how difficult it is for women to stop or to say what they don't want clearly, or what they do want clearly. Because I could really relate to that situation in the sense that I've also experienced how hard it is to like verbalize in a situation like that. I don't want to do X, but how easy it is for the man to choose, right? To take your physical signals rather than your verbal ones, or just to have such different experiences, like to just not at all realize that that's really hard for you to say.
I do like the way that Srinivasan tells that story, because she does, she does emphasize that the woman initiated a lot of the the sexual actions
Yeah.
in the so I thought I guess I just liked that. I don't know, she didn't take, and I suppose the woman herself didn't take that route, right, of trying to like make it fit the sort of the male or patriarchal stereotype of sexual assault.
Yeah.
uh,
That's
but she
true.
still wanted to say this was not right, and it was ultimately a sexual assault.
Yeah, and that's the bit where there's some reasonable disagreement, right? Because it's like
Yeah,
she's clear that it doesn't fit any of our normal conditions for a sexual assault. He didn't do anything. In a way, the thing that she's drawing attention to is the system, right? Like
yeah,
that women are passive in this way, and it's hard for us to say no, and that men are sort of more blasé about it. But it's
yeah,
then weird to scapegoat that guy, right? So at least I had the intuition reading the case, whoa, you're really picking. And then it's worse because he's this Ghanaian guy. Like, maybe he's going to already be a minority on that campus. I can't remember what
yeah.
the campus was, but just somehow that, like, this is the scapegoating worry.
Yeah, yeah, right. But I see, but perhaps that's, yeah. But she does elsewhere in the chapter. She insists that men should know that. That's part of the, I think, part of the point of this chapter, right? That men should know better now. So it's not. So it's not. It's perhaps not a scapegoating then, right?
Yeah, but
She says something like, "Women have been telling you this for years."
how much better? I think it's a super interesting question, right? Like, how, even if they know, right, not to be even remotely pushy, not,
Mm.
in that situation, again, it's like she's initiating, they're
Yeah, I know.
high, they're having like a good time.
Yeah,
She's true, like, I think it was described that they're making out, and then she puts her hand down his pants, and then she gives him a blowjob. It's all, she's doing that
yeah.
stuff, and then for him to, what would he need to do differently to know that that could be happening? Maybe just not engage in sex, right? Or not engage in sex with strangers. Maybe that would be a way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps this just tells us that we need to interrogate our desires.
Mm,
I mean, perhaps is that part of the trouble there? I said that the woman was trying to resist sort of putting it in the patriarchal stereotype of sexual assault, but I think in the end that's what happens, right? Or it's that stereotype that's making us say there's reasonable disagreement. I get it's this idea of sexual assault as what, sex without consent, isn't it?
yeah, but I feel like we could accept that point about in the essay, like, this thing's way too narrow, just when a man really aggresses, and we
Yeah,
need this other, maybe don't call it assault, but we need a concept of something being it's morally troubling that women are going along with a lot of stuff that they don't actually want.
yeah,
But I guess I was just trying to think, even if we brought all that stuff in, what would the guy be meant to do to know that he's having like a safe, consensual, fully pleasurable and enjoyable sexual interaction?
right, right. Oh, I think surely if you take the radical feminist critique of sexuality seriously, you have to say there's nothing he could do.
Yeah,
You
that was
couldn't know. You couldn't know. Or
good.
yeah, or perhaps you should treat it as not possible.
Yeah. And that's sort of interesting too, because maybe if if men really took that seriously, every sexual encounter, particularly ones with people you don't know well, is a fucking gamble. Like,
Yeah,
because you don't know, she might be traumatized and unable to really, she might go
yeah,
into, there's people that go into like bodily, what's it called, immobility, right? Because of certain experiences. Anything could be
yeah,
going on in her head and you don't know. And so you're
yeah,
always taking
yeah.
a huge gamble.
Yeah, and I mean, you talked about the problem, and I think, and sort of Srinivasan, of being able to articulate. But if I think the problem occurs prior to that, right? That presumes that women have desires that they then have trouble articulating. But if radical feminists are right, then what are women's desires?
Yeah.
Like, have women even been allowed to have their own desires, such that they could then be in a position to find it hard to verbalize them?
I think that's a perfect segue into the next. Actually, let's skip two because I think that's such a big part of the question of the right to sex essay and then the coda, right? But is that okay if we just skip over two and then maybe
Yeah.
come back to it? because that's the porn one. Yeah, let's skip, because I
But
just
yeah.
think that
Yeah.
is exactly the question, right? Like in the right to sex essay, I guess, is that fair to gloss it as like she was trying to put out in the public domain that we can't just take people's, we want to fully respect the idea that no one owes anyone sex, which I
Yeah.
think is very, like, I have to say, bizarre to call your book The Right to Sex, as though quantifying
Yeah.
over the fact that there is such a right, distributing thousands and thousands of copies of a thing that quantifies over a thing that you're ultimately saying doesn't exist.
Right.
Like, what a mixed message. Anyway, setting that aside,
Yeah.
she's very strident line. There is no right.
Right
No
to sex.
one owes anyone sex.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we should also be
However,
thinking about
yeah.
like what we desire and how
Yeah.
politicized that is. And she does toy with the idea that we have a duty to
Yes.
consider the politics of
Yeah.
our desire.
Yeah, to interrogate our
So I think
desires.
so that fits nicely with your question, right? Like what?
Yeah. Yeah. Notice that on that framing, the question is who we desire, I think, not so much what we desire, right?
You mean like?
Mc-
Say more.
so McKinnon talks about, or I think her contribution is to look at our desires and conclude that what women are socialized to desire is subordination.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a person, right? It's a position in a hierarchy. And what men are socialized to desire is domination. Again, not a person,
Yep.
but a position in a hierarchy.
Yeah.
Whereas,
Good.
yeah, I feel like Srinivasan is talking more about who we desire.
I'm trying to find that. Do you remember there's that sort of, is it 77? I want that quote about the master and the slave. Oh, I think it's there, yeah.
Would that be in the coda then?
No, I think it's in The Right to Sex. It says, the radical feminists of the late 1960s and 70s demanded that we abandon the Freudian view that held sexual desire to be, in the words of Catherine McKinnon, an innate, primary, natural, pre-political, unconditioned drive divided along the biological gender line. Instead, they urged, we must recognize that it is patriarchy that makes sex, as we know it, what it is. A practice marked by male domination and female submission,
Yeah.
whose constitutive emotions are, in McKinnon's formulation, and that was the bit I wanted, hostility and contempt, or arousal of master to slave, together with awe and vulnerability, or arousal of slave to master. So is that what you had in mind?
Perfect.
Like the dominance and submission relationship itself is so eroticized.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I just feel like when, as the chapter unfolds and perhaps the chapter after, I feel like the problem that Srinivasan is talking about is the problem of certain people being excluded or not having the status of desirable conferred on them.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very different problem. I think the problem of being excluded from the status of desirable is very different from the problem of being made to desire subordination.
Good.
I do think the two are related.
Good.
I think that, that our socialization to desire, dominance and subordination does results in certain people being desirable or certain qualities being desirable. But radical feminism's goal isn't to include everyone in the status of desirable.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
absolutely.
its worry is not people's exclusion. Its worry is what women have been made to desire.
Good. I see. So we started with this question of like, what is or what can we even say about a woman's desire, or how does she see sex, or how does she think about her role in sex? There is a radical feminist project there, and one answer to it is like they have been constructed in this way to eroticize and desire their own subordination. Getting away from that might mean getting away from sex, or at least sex as we know it.
Yeah.
But the thing that Amia is mainly taking up in this very, I guess, famous essay, right, is certain marginalized groups as we would pick them out with identity politics, get left out of having sex.
Yeah.
Take for granted what that means. Heterosexual penis and vagina intercourse, where the man is the primary thing of interest. But what about disabled people and trans people and fat people?
Yeah, exactly.
Good. So totally different questions. And she's not actually concerned with the feminist question.
I think so. Yeah.
Good. Sorry, I took a while to get to understand that.
Or certainly she departs from that question, or she runs the two together, right?
Well, yeah, I think you're totally right, because she doesn't really, there's nothing distinctively women involving about that essay.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It is really, and I mean, because she has that bit that angered all of the gender critical and radical community, where she just includes smoothly trans women being excluded by cis, she uses that word, lesbian women, as though that's just yet another example of...
That's right. It's another instance of this phenomenon.
Yeah. And rolls that together with, like, on Grindr, Asian men don't get as many messages or whatever. But that, I find, good. I think that's really helpful.
I mean, then it's just a different diagnosis of the system, right? Or of what's suppressing women. And in fact, I think you no longer have the claim that women uniquely are being oppressed. You have you have what? A sexuality that oppresses everyone but alpha males?
I think so, and I think this goes back to what was in the first... no, actually, is it in this one, when she starts with Elliot Rodger? That is, this is the one that I read the last. Right, because that really sets up this paradigm of, like, hot blonde sluts or whatever, and then ripped alpha males, or the ones she talks about on Grindr are always, like, really, really, like, ripped bodies, and the Ryan Gosling types, I think she describes them as. So it's true, there's this kind of accepting the given of what sex is for us, which is highly distorted, and then just worrying about who's left out of that horrific, highly distorted, from a feminist perspective, practice.
I mean, I think even the title takes it as given, doesn't it? The right to sex. Wouldn't Catherine McKinnon ask, what is that the right to?
Yeah.
You know, don't we want to think about what sex itself is?
Yeah.
It's the right to, for men, that's the right to domination.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting because, again, it's like these points that she makes in various essays, then she sort of does seem to walk them back a bit in other essays, right? Because in the, I think it's at the end of the pornography essay, that she says something about, like, we would need to really, like, give the young the ability to reconceive what sex even is. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And then so she sort of has it on her radar.
She says it at the start of the book, something like, what would a free sex look like?
Right.
Although again there I thought that I thought she wasn't quite understanding, or at least I guess wasn't articulating it the way radical feminists would, right? It's not about a free sex.
Yeah. That's
sex released from repressive forces or something.
Yeah. But maybe this is the thing, because in the coda, right? So she raises that question in the Right to Sex essay, and then she's added in the book this coda essay where she sort of seemed to reveal this kind of odd metaphysical view, and I'm wondering if that view will help us to reveal how she thinks about what sex is.
What's the odd metaphysical view?
So she says... no. Sorry, I've got too many pages turned here. If I can't find it in like 3 seconds, I'll just say it in my own words. It's early on in the chapter.
Not the task was to liberate sex from the distortions of oppression?
Nope, here it is. Oh yes, sorry. What did you just say?
The task was to liberate sex from the distortions of oppression? Was it that?
Pretty much, but that's so funny. Page 96, it's got almost exactly those words, but it doesn't have the word task. So
to liberate sex from the distortions of oppression is not the same. It's just saying everyone can desire whatever or whomever they want.
So yes, it's in passage 11. Is that where you're looking? She
No, I'm
says,
actually thinking of passage 9.
oh, so maybe that's
And I'm
setting things
thinking
up.
there, she does seem to be aware of the difference. To liberate sex from the distortions of oppression is not the same as just saying everyone can desire whatever or whomever they want. The first is a radical demand, the second is a liberal one. No, sorry, that didn't say what I thought it might say.
No, but that's setting things up because then she goes on in 11 and she says, of the right to sex essay, when I wrote that, quote, desire can cut against what politics has chosen for
Yeah,
us and choose for itself. I was not imagining a desire regulated by the demands of justice, which was the audience interpretation. Some of the pushback she got was like, oh, so we should just go around being just about who we have sex with, like have sex with a lot of fat people and whatever. And so she says, I'm not doing that, but I'm imagining a desire set free from the binds of injustice. I think that was for me that captured the most for me in that essay of what she had in mind, right? Because that seems to me a metaphysical view about how a person enters
yeah,
the world
yeah.
with this non-corrupted sense of sexual
Desires.
desire and attraction and maybe orientation, but then
Yeah,
the like malign forces of our social conditioning and
yeah.
institutional and cultural, like,
Suppress them or distort them.
exactly. And so
Yeah,
she wants
yeah,
to defend herself by saying, set the people free so that they
yeah,
can be attracted to all the weird and wonderful diversity that they would have been had they not been corrupted. And I don't
yeah.
know, what is that view of desire and sex?
I want to ask too, can she simultaneously talk about the formation of desire and the corruption of it?
Well, I think
Because
that metaphysics presumes there's no formation, right? It's like
that's
we
right.
come with it.
Yeah.
It's already in us somehow.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a
It's
plausible,
just misdirected or something like that.
yes. But that view, I think, that view has its sympathizers when it comes to sexual orientation, right? That it's in us and it's going to reveal itself pretty soon in childhood. But that surely isn't true of like attractions and preferences within your orientation. Like, really, are you 4 years old and you start, I don't know, or are you just like 20, but no matter your experiences up until that point, or no matter your opportunities or what's on television, you would
Mm,
always and only have been attracted to or turned on by the same. That doesn't.
yeah. Do you think perhaps it's not metaphysical, it's more rhetorical? She wants to claim that desires that will emerge once we've interrogated them or once we've liberated women as their authentic desires.
That's clever, though. I mean, good, good.
Y-
Yeah, maybe. So you think she actually just has a moral view of what our desire should look like? It
Yeah,
should be inclusive.
yeah,
And then she wants to say, she puts that in a kind of metaphysical way about what our true selves.
yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be so different, would it, from feminist talk of women's full personhood? Because feminists do talk on the one hand, or post-Beauvoir about women being constructed such that they're not full persons.
Yeah,
But on the other hand, they insist that women are deep down full persons, and that will, that will burst forth
yeah, good.
when,
Good. So, what's the sensible way to say both of those things? Just like we have a capacity to be full human persons, we never got to be it, but it was thwarted. And similarly, for sexual desire, we had a capacity to be more diverse and inclusive in our attractions and desires, but that was thwarted. So, because that wouldn't require saying there's a way you really are.
I don't know that you get to say it was thwarted though. If you think that there's no right way, or if you think all we have is a capacity to desire lots of different things, then can you talk about that capacity being directed in one direction as a thwarting?
Maybe not, but you can certainly say some developments of capacities are better than others, I think, right? So you can say women had a capacity to be full human persons, but then they were like co-opted to men's interests, and there's something there that like there would have been more flourishing in the world, or there would have been more
Right.
realization of talent or something.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the same with
Okay.
sex, like you would have had a more pleasure-filled, satisfying human connection based sex life, or the world would have had more high quality orgasms or something if capacities had been gone in this direction rather than this one. You're right.
Again, I just find that or just, my rad fem ears, like, hear that and alarm bells go off, because I think that's just not what the goal was, right? More pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so it's interesting, because I also think that, God, what would it, if she thinks they really have, like, the social structures have come in and, I'm going to keep saying thwarted, but maybe that's not fair, but, like, there is some, either it's rhetorical and you're right, or she has this kind of metaphysics of the true self, or the person that's there all along. I don't know. She can, I guess, run the same line for women, right? She can say, we've been conditioned into having a sort of desire that excludes heaps of people and subordinates women to men, and all of that is, like, constraining people in a way that we want to, like, chop them free. So she could have some vision of a both sex equal and inclusive and totally transformed idea of sex.
Right. So you think she can say desire as formed subordinates, or serves to subordinate women and also to exclude other groups of people from sexual relations.
Yeah. Why not, right? If she's already in the business of characterizing all the injustice that came in to squash everyone into these small boxes, she can just pop in whatever additional injustice you like, right? I guess. She doesn't really talk about it, but
I guess it's just that if you think the problem is that desire has been formed in such a way that serves to subordinate women, then the problem isn't I think the suppression of an authentic desire. It's the content of the as constructed desire.
Say that again. Sorry.
The problem isn't that we've been socialized to desire certain things. The problem's not that our desire has been constructed. The problem is what the content of the desire is.
Yes, I think that's right. You mean if we do a thought experiment where you'd been socially constructed to be the way that Amia Srinivasan thinks the world ought to be, could she have a problem? No, I think that's right. I think that
right. So then the problem isn't the thwarting.
Good. No, good. I think that's right.
The problem isn't that desire is being formed or misformed or deformed.
It's the content.
It's what it's being formed as.
But she relies so much on this idea that there was a thwarting, right? Because I really think that sentence, it's guys, I'm not telling you have to do what justice requires. I'm just telling you I want you to be free from injustice. So you're supposed to feel like a victim now. You oh God, I thought I thought as a lesbian, I didn't want to have sex with any males, and so I exclude all trans women. Oh, but I've just been subject to injustice this whole time for not desiring penises that identify as women. Right? So now, set me free from that injustice, and then I'll be having this kind of life. Like, isn't that disingenuous? Yeah. Maybe that's too strong, disingenuous, but it's like, she does want us, she's not admitting she just has a moral view of what would be good, right? She wants to say more strongly than that, like, you have been a victim and I want you to be set free. So I'm supposed to think of reconceptualize what lesbianism is, so I'm free of injustice.
What's the injustice?
That I have been constrained to believe that penises were outside the remit of my sexual orientation.
Yeah.
And so it's not that the trans woman is entitled to sex from me. Oh, she's disavowing that at every step.
Yeah.
But it's that I have suffered injustice due to my cultural conditioning that leads me to exclude all males. What a racket!
Yeah.
Like, what an absolute racket of a claim.
Yeah. Do you mean there's something like quite neat? So she gets to say there's no right to sex. Fortunately, however, when we all reflect on and interrogate and work on our desires, everyone will be getting it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll give freely. We don't need to say you're obliged, right? We just
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
create the world where
Because
everyone.
fortunately, no one will any longer be being denied it.
Yeah, yeah. And it's actually interesting because there's a. Now I'm blanking on the. Anyway, there has been this assumed correspondence, right, between rights and duties. Like some people think it goes both ways. So
Yeah.
she wants to say there's no right, but there's a duty. But if
It's a
those
good point.
two things are
I guess you would say the duty's not to give it, the duty's to interrogate your desires.
yeah, but if you do that effectively,
Yeah,
then you're going to
that's
be
right.
giving it out all
Yeah.
over the place.
And from where does that duty come?
From Amia.
Anyway. Yeah.
Sorry, I got unprofessionally impassioned for a moment.
I
there.
guess I took a lot of that as her attempt to. I mean, I think she does want us to interrogate our desires, right? But she doesn't. But she doesn't want to be seen as too heavy-handed or as authoritarian or as telling us what we should want. I mean, I have to say that bothered me a little bit. I don't. I'm not sure about this sort of this squeamishness, if you like, about us talking to one another about and telling one another what we think is right. She seems really apprehensive. I mean, this is quite dominant in feminism now, isn't it? Like really apprehensive about saying to women, you don't really want that, or you've just been made to want that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, I guess I think you're right that there's a squeamishness or a reluctance to really like have a view.
Yeah.
But I also think she's probably sometimes drawing on reasonable history for having that squeamishness, right? Because she's saying, look how off-putting it was to new women into the movement when they were told like fraternizing with men.
Yeah.
So it's true that like the moralizing of
I guess I feel like there's some conflation of the way in which that was done or what it was done about with doing that, with that practice of criticism itself.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think definitely criticizing women to their face, right? Like telling a woman she's a traitor to feminism because she has sex with a man.
Yeah.
Interpersonally, it's very different to like writing a book defending the position that
Yeah.
this kind of stuff shouldn't be thought of as sex at all, or women shouldn't have these kind of desires, but should or would ideally have these ones. So,
and isn't criticism what's required of us if we want to take one another seriously?
yeah, I mean,
Isn't there something about like I'll look you in the eye?
yeah, but the liberals, for sure, you're supposed to be stridently criticizing and persuading one another.
Yeah.
To get towards your view of the good life or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So you're right. There's no. Maybe that's more. I mean, yeah. I guess we don't know her motivations, right? But yeah, maybe that's something about the writing of a popular book, or you want to be as appealing personally to as many people as possible, so you don't want to be moralizing, or you know, that I can't remember what the chapter is where she's very fearful of authoritarianism. Like it's almost in every paragraph, like. But we don't want to do that because that's authoritarian. Is that the castralism? Anyway, I can't remember where it is, but maybe there's just some other motivations for not coming across that way.
Yeah. I mean, couldn't you say, look, I think this is what's going on, and simultaneously say, like, I don't think that, you know, we should bring the law in here or something. You know, like criminalize these desires.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not gonna force you to stop doing these things, but I am gonna say I think it's wrong what we're all doing.
Yeah.
You not do both things?
Well, I just think it becomes sociological, right? Like, why did she not? I don't know. You know?
Yeah.
Like, what? Yeah. I think you're totally right to ask that question, but I don't know if we'll be able to come up with any story about why she didn't.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to know, because she certainly could have taken a much stronger position.
Yeah.
Okay, should we go on to... Maybe we should go on to the not sleeping with your students, because I think we had a really good discussion about that.
Yeah, it was an interesting chapter.
Yeah, it was interesting. Do you want to have a go at the one sentence summary?
Gosh, right. Okay. Well, she's trying to give a way of thinking about why it might be problematic that isn't the usual way. I'm now trying to think what's the usual way because teachers and students are in a hierarchical relationship because there's power imbalance. They shouldn't have sexual relations.
Yeah.
Uh,
Either they should because they're all consenting adults, or they shouldn't because it's like a professional relationship of a certain kind with hierarchy.
yeah, and and she says, well, how about they teachers shouldn't just because that undermines their ability to do their job to teach them.
Yeah.
And there isn't there's perhaps a more interesting argument than it sounds there about why.
Yeah, there was a nice, oh, there it is. Yeah, on 128, the end of sort of setting things up, she says, um,
Is it too sterile?
yeah, that
Is
one.
it too sterile, too boring to suggest that instead of sleeping with his student, this professor should have been teaching her?
I really liked that.
Yeah.
And I got excited because I'd been listening, I think I might have told you about it at the time, I'd been listening to this audio book of these, it was like early fantastic women in history or something. So I was trying to find ones I hadn't heard of yet. You know, oh, this woman in China helped this war in 800 BC or something.
Oh, wow.
And so I'd come across this one in the 1100s who was Heloise in France, I think. And basically I got really, I'd listened to it before I'd read the chapter, and the story was just like, oh, this absolutely gifted poet and intellectual, but because she was a woman, she wouldn't have been allowed into the universities, which were all male. She could have only gotten an education in a convent as a nun, but she wasn't a nun yet. She would become one later. And so it was like her only path to continuing education was private tutor. And her dad then hired this very famous, I think, theologian and intellectual at the time. But as soon as he hired in this personal tutor, they started banging.
Oh,
And then got together and ended up getting married. And I just had the most visceral rage reaction when I heard that in the book. I was like, of course, he didn't just nurture her talent and help her to become brilliant and like an amazingly outstanding woman from that time. Of course, he just had sex with her.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then led her away from the path that she was proceeding down.
Yeah.
I think that's a really nice illustration of what Srinivasan is trying to say here. Because what's she's saying? She's saying something like, or she's suggesting, she's raising this possibility that when women find or girls find their teachers sexually desirable, perhaps what they're doing is what's the Freudian term?
Oh, projecting, is it? Or
I don't think it's projecting. I say something like displacing. That's not quite it either. But what is it that really they have a love of a love of learning, or they want to acquire the knowledge that the professor has. But what they're doing is
transference.
Yeah, transference. They're mistaking that for a desire. They're mistaking it basically a desire for the knowledge that the teacher has for a desire for the teacher himself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And I thought that was a really interesting idea too, right? The confusion that we could never know about the student's mind as teachers, whether they wanted to be like us or wanted to be with us.
Yeah.
I thought that was like, you don't know. The student is kind of in awe or excited in some way. And then the typical male teacher of the past has just exploited that. Oh, well, hopefully she's into me and then I get some sex out of it. And then I guess Amia's point is like, that's a failure of teaching. Or cultivation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not falsifiable, right? So you could, but she does give some reasons for thinking that it might be going on in the case of women. You know, I think, doesn't she talk about how women aren't really socialized to see themselves as the teachers?
Yeah, right. And less so when all the teachers are men, right? Or at least most of, I mean, the more sex equal that the academies are, maybe the less that's going to be true. They see a possibility. But in the older time, right, when it's mostly male teachers and female students having a crush, It would
Yeah.
be so hard to tell the difference, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I think there's just something really interesting there too about um, so we do have this sort of what attraction to or a desire for something, but because what in our existing framework we can't accommodate that, we direct it somewhere else, somewhere where it can be accommodated, like a desire for a man. I guess I was just thinking about how often feminists do talk about, I think I'm thinking about Miranda Fricke's work. How feminists do talk about how, women don't have names for things. But I
mhm.
suppose this is also considering the consequences of that. Well, if they don't have names for things, perhaps those things just don't just stay latent. They get directed somewhere else,
Good.
somewhere problematic.
Yeah, we make sense of them the best we can with the
That's
resources we
right.
have. Yeah.
With the resources we have,
Yeah,
yeah.
and it does explain, I mean, it predicts, right? If the hypothesis is true, that a lot of it is transference and then it gets redirected into sexual desire, it would predict that when the affair ends, or even during it, there starts to be some sort of like frustration, lack of fulfillment, resentment, right? Because it's
Yeah.
not quite capturing what it actually was about, or it ends and you
Yeah.
feel used, and that reveals to you that you actually wanted someone to take you seriously intellectually
Yeah,
rather
that's
than
yeah. Yeah, you wanted some intellectual company.
yeah. So yeah, it was interesting because I think before I read the essay, and this is just biographical, I think, because I'd had this conversation a few years earlier with this absolutely infuriatingly irritating man who was very certain about the wrongness of teachers and students in all situations. And just
Right.
because, when someone is such a dick about a conversation, you dig in.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah. I know, and you find yourself doing, you're like, why am I like pursuing this with such vigor?
yeah, because he's an asshole.
Yeah.
So I had my priors were like, sometimes it's fine. Like, just at least I can imagine cases where it's fine. And I
Yeah.
think I definitely got some new things to consider out of that essay. So
Yeah.
I quite liked that.
And perhaps it did also illuminate the stakes in a way that, like what's at stake here? Women won't continue with their studies. They won't do their PhDs. They won't become academics. I'm not sure that that's often really talked about.
Yeah. You mean like if they themselves don't come to realize what they really wanted and they accept that it was desire?
Yeah, or they accept the man acting or the teacher acting on it that way, and
Yeah.
then end up in a relationship of some sort.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it probably is talked about that women can drop out at high rates, and part of this is like sexual harassment. But I think you're totally right that we don't talk about the idea in these terms, that like there
Yeah.
might be this kind of transference, and then the student themselves might not understand that that's not what she wanted.
Yeah.
And so even if she feels frustrated and disillusioned, she doesn't quite articulate, he wronged me by taking
Yeah.
advantage of this for sex rather than just encouraging my.
Yeah. Is it that once he's pushed you off that path, you can't see the path of learning? You can't see that you were on it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is a really serious wrong, right? That would be a kind
Yeah.
of a real lack of self-knowledge in a way about what you wanted and what you could have been good at, and
Yeah.
how life could have gone differently, like had he
Yeah.
just taught you.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I remember in the group, right, that our friends were not entirely convinced
Mm.
that it wasn't possible to have both. So that was also interesting. That there was some skepticism, right, about whether it's always true that you can't both teach and have sex.
Yeah.
I can't remember
That's right.
where you stood on that. Do you remember?
Oh, I think my intuition after reading this is no, no. Perhaps just because I feel like you really couldn't be sure that you're not doing what Srinivasan's talking about.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's my.
And and I guess my other intuition was just that once sex is involved, your relationship is different. I don't think you can just go back to the teacher-student relationship in the class. Like, oh, now that we're in the classroom, we just resume our teacher-student relationship.
Yeah, or even supervision, right? Yeah, it's really hard for me to think of any. I can sort of see what the idealized view might be that like, oh, just two people who really love a particular subject like philosophy, and then they just love talking to each other about it, and then they're also attracted to each other, so they just have lots of sex and talk about philosophy. There's some idealized view where like it just doesn't matter that one's 40 and that one's 20, or that one's institutionally powerful and that one's just starting out. But I think I do tend to have the same view that like any relationship that is like a supervisor, grad student, undergraduate, someone in your class, so just it definitely risks distorting what they're actually interested in.
Distorting and then sort of settling it, right?
And
the distortion can't be undone.
Yeah, but I wonder if some of my reasons for thinking it's wrong at that point still do come back to the older story, which is
I was just thinking when you were
story.
talking, like that, they're not Srinivasan's terms.
No, like it would just be for me, oh, it's a grad student. Well, then what happens when they start to be uncomfortable with the relationship, but the counterfactuals are hard for them because now they're at risk of losing a supervisor or whatever, or they're in your class but they don't want to get a bad grade, or something. And those are the old reasons.
So what would Srinivasan say? Would she say you shouldn't do it because once you have directed women's desires away from learning?
Yeah, and then the Jane Gallop thing, right, which she starts the chapter with, talking about this woman who had sex with a lot of her female students, right?
Yeah.
And said that teaching is always slightly erotic. So I guess the Jane Gallop pushback would be, no, there is a way to just do teaching where it is always both. It just sounds creepy. Yeah, I don't know. I think you're right. Maybe Srinivasan's pushback would be that there's just no way to, when you take it that way, you've always failed. You could always have been using that time or that energy or that stuff for teaching. I don't know. I mean, I guess there's going to be rare cases, right, where, like it's probably, we should grant that like personality politics play into things, right? Like people love certain jobs because the manager is really fun and charismatic, or their colleagues are great to have lunch with and that guy's hilarious. So I mean that's definitely true, and so maybe there are some cases where you take a slightly boring, I don't know, management course but the lecturer is cute and so the flirting or the affair somehow drags you along with the learning, right? So it's got to be
right, you mean so it can almost be enabling?
Yeah, it's got to be that sometimes for some subject matters this
I think Srinivasan could permit that, right? She's worried about what happens when that's acted on by the teacher. And then, because then it's made to look like, well, you weren't here for the learning, you were here for me.
Wait, when you say she could permit that, do you mean it's only bad for her in the case where the student was already excited about the learning and then you exploit it? So for the boring teacher in the boring subject, that's okay? Because it's enabling? Do you see what I mean?
I guess I was just thinking it's bad when it's acted on.
Oh, I'm imagining as a counterexample, I might be totally wrong, but I'm imagining that the teachers do act on it. There are boring subjects, and it's actually a tool of learning to become this like fantastically charismatic, flirtatious, and interesting teacher.
Yeah.
And okay, maybe she would still say, still fine, stop it before the sex, right? And maybe then it's enabling that it doesn't quite derail the student's learning into this other thing. But I'm thinking for her, the best case is always where the student was already like falling in love with your discipline and then it rerouted.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking, is it true in a boring class that you couldn't even start having sex with some of them and it was still enabling? Like it was the only reason they really liked coming to class and the otherwise so boring assessments, but now they had a crush on you at the same time?
If we think about the more general picture, right? And even that women might not be particularly like socialized to have a love of learning. I think Srinivasan's going to have a worry about that being, I guess, yet another reminder, right? So, yeah, she might say, well, look, a lot of women come into uni perhaps without a really, I don't know, like a kind of fervent love of learning.
Good. And you mean if they've already... Sorry, go on.
But like having the teacher having a sexual relationship is just going to be like one more, I guess, denial of a self-concept.
Right, and a familiar thing from the past. Like those women will have always had romantic or sexual attention of some unwanted kind.
Yes, yeah.
But the novel experience is the learning. Good.
Yeah. Yeah, so then it's perhaps actually, as the teacher, you could do the rerouting.
Yeah.
In a good way.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that's great. Because then it's like you have a responsibility, even if you're very charismatic and half the class has a crush on you, but your duty in that context is to make sure they know that they're really just excited about the course material.
Yes.
That's good.
Isn't there just something perhaps so honourable about that?
There is, yeah. There is.
I mean, look, it has to be said, right, this really appeals to you and I, doesn't it?
Say that again. You roboted out.
Like there's those people who would love it. Like if all women, you and I. Oh, my internet connection is unstable.
Yeah, but I think we only lost you for like 10 seconds. So just say that bit again, and then we'll.
I think it appeals to, or perhaps does it appeal personally to you and as people who will love it. If like all women wanted to talk about ideas all day, every day.
I mean, for me, that sounds great.
So we're like, all teachers do the rerouting. Make of all women lovers of learning.
Yeah, what a great line.
Who could be against that?
Yeah, I mean, who would be against this proposal? I suspect most teachers encountering these ideas would probably agree. Is that fair? Can you think of any? I mean, of course there are some guys out there that are enjoying having the students as a dating pool, but they kind of know they're being creepy anyway, probably. I don't know. Do you think it? I mean, I think there's surprising ideas in here, but once you read them, they're probably quite persuasive. Can you imagine anyone really wanting to push back for non-self-serving reasons? I just find it hard to imagine.
I mean, I guess I can imagine the old line being run about how it treats women as infantile.
Yeah.
Like they don't know what they want. Interestingly, I guess Srinivasan's kind of explicit about that, right?
Yeah, for once.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's true.
Good on her.
Yeah, that's true. We're complaining that she wasn't taking enough of this.
Yeah, that was unfair of me.
No, well, I mean, it was probably fair in that essay, but it's good to admit that here she's taking quite a strong stand. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a slightly self-congratulatory ending, wasn't there, of that chapter? Because she was like,
Yes.
and then my colleague said he's leaving them to it, and I also left them to it. It's like, okay,
yeah,
great.
and that was also, I mean, I felt like that really didn't have anything to do with the substance of the chapter.
I know. Like,
I mean, there she's just saying, like, you shouldn't be, like, once you're a professor, don't be a creep and hang out with the kids.
Yeah, and that's not to do with because you're rerouting their love of learning in the wrong way.
Probably to do with you not being a loser.
Yeah. Well, I also thought there it was more to do with who she was aligning herself with, right? Because she said she was roughly the age of those people. Yeah. She could have probably hung out with them for a bit longer and not ended up sleeping with anyone. But still, it's like, but I'm going to go with my colleague because we're the colleagues leave at this time and we leave the students. So it's us and them and yeah. Okay, do we want to, I mean, we've probably been going for like, I don't know, an hour and a quarter maybe, or maybe even a bit longer. So do we want to do pastoralism sort of quickly, or do we want to just sort of leave it at that? How are you feeling?
I reckon we should talk about that. Pastoralism, because she's so adamant about it, or anti-pastoralism.
Yeah, good.
And I think, this is she says, frequently, I think throughout the book, like, there are hard questions and uncomfortable questions, and I feel like here is where, some of those questions need to be asked.
Yeah, good. Do you want me to try and do the summary?
Of sex, capitalism, and capitalism.
Yeah, or do you feel highly confident?
Oh, I do not feel highly confident.
Here's my stab at it, and you can tell me what I'm getting wrong. So my stab was the desire to punish men using the power of the state is choosing the symbolic over alleviating real harms to women. And then the examples were the prostitution debate, the abortion debate, and particularly domestic violence, which I think you mentioned already, that like there were these cases where the way that men were being punished for domestic violence against their partners deprived the female partners of income or stuff necessary to keep their lives going. So it actually ended up being worse for those women, or those women ended up not making use of the punishments so that they could have the means to survival. So I guess that was my sort of takeaway of the discussion, that there was a lot of these ways that like punishment ended up backfiring and either harming women or harming vulnerable women more than helping, like in prostitution, or harming like the marginalized across the board more than helping like more privileged women or whatever. Is that seem?
Yeah, I think that's a good summary.
Okay.
Okay, where to start? Can I admit to being frustrated in this chapter?
Yes.
Because I feel, she's explicitly telling feminists to be realists.
Yep.
Which means here what it means not fighting for the criminalization of prostitution in any form.
Yeah, exactly. There was that bit on 154, right, where she said the criminalization in part or in full of sex work has never, in practice, got rid of prostitution. And then we just proceed throughout the chapter on the assumption that like it's impossible to do that, and anyone who thinks it is just being a symbolic, like just obsessed with this idea at the cost to real women.
And this is reminiscent of her discussion of pornography.
Yeah.
In the end, she says it will always be here.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Can I then remind you of the line with which she ended the preface? At its best, feminist theory discloses the possibilities for women's lives that are latent in women's struggles, drawing those possibilities closer. To me, this chapter is a foreclosure of possibility.
Good.
Because of a failure of her imagination and nothing else.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's hard. I mean, you would have to have tried so hard, right, to have gotten rid of pornography. You're right, she has that discussion about controlling the internet and how, sorry, I think that's the essay we skipped, isn't it? But she talks about like porn's on the internet and you can't really control the internet, so that's all just like that ship has sailed.
Yeah,
and then here with
that's right.
Prostitution,
She acts like we've tried the experiment.
Yes, but we've tried little partial attempts at something like the experiment for prostitution. We've tried hardly anything for pornography.
That's right, yeah. And for prostitution, for a very short period of time.
Yeah. And in few countries in sort of half-hearted ways with not proper policing or not proper
that's right, not sufficient resources.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, like, can we really have been said to have had a crack at this?
But the huge irony, do you remember, of this chapter was that she was like, we can never do anything about prostitution, that's a given, but let us get rid of the capitalist state and all capitalism.
Right. Feminists should be realists, and also apparently getting rid of capitalism is consistent with being a realist.
Yeah, no prisons, just full socialism. Yeah, I know. It was very...
I mean, but don't you think that's a bit revealing? Like, in the end, it's the feminist project that's the most diluted one.
Good.
Or what is it that we can least imagine? Women's liberation, no more prostitution, no more sexual access to women's bodies.
Yeah, I feel like
you can imagine getting rid of police and jail and capitalism, but she can't imagine no more porn.
Yeah.
Or no more prostitution.
Wouldn't she just want to say, maybe the more charitable reading would be where does her true sympathy lie? It lies with class,
Yeah.
not with sex. And so
Yeah.
the bit you read out at the very start from the preface about sex class, she just completely showed that's not actually what she's here for.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not quite that she can't imagine it, but that she just doesn't even bother to choose to put her imagination there, because she's actually either a socialist feminist, or I think actually she just takes intersectionality so far that she becomes a global justice person.
Yeah. I mean, I think this becomes really clear in this chapter, right? She says things like, it's an embarrassment to feminism that decades of improving conditions for some of the world's women in some respects, greater legal rights, better representation in tertiary education, elite professions, electoral politics and the media, improved access to reproductive health care, widespread agreement in polite society that women are men's equals, blah, 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 have coincided with an increase across the board in other forms of inequality, especially economic inequality. It's an embarrassment to feminism. You know, she acts like it's feminism's job to end class hierarchy. That's not feminism's job. It's Marxism's job.
Absolutely.
Feminism's job to end sex hierarchy.
Yeah, but it does reveal this view of feminism's just the wrong word here, right? Like if she had said, what an embarrassment to global justice practice or global justice movement.
Or an embarrassment to Marxism.
Yeah, then fine, right?
Yeah.
But so I totally agree with you. There's this conflating.
But how can she start the book with this line? How can she show an awareness of the radical feminist belief that women are members of a sex class, and then say things like this?
I know.
Is it that she doesn't fully comprehend like what it means to think that women are members of a sex class?
I can't remember what it is, but she does have this I mean, maybe it's towards the end of this chapter actually, because she did sort of gesture at thinking that it's capitalism. Right, page 177. I don't know if this helps, but she said, a full critique of capital must see gendered subordination as an essential aspect of the broader capitalist system. Economic, yes, but also social, ecological, psychic, and so on, that is its proper object. So I wondered, that's like halfway down 177, just before the what about the rapists paragraph, and I just wondered maybe she just has a view where, yeah, she's a global justice person, she thinks capitalism is the fundamental source of domination, or the most important, or it subsumes all the others, and gender is somehow a bit, so she can sort of care about it, but only insofar as it gets like tacked on and explained there.
Only insofar as it's sort of secondary derivative in the service of class hierarchy.
Yeah.
But any Marxist can do that.
Yeah. But then if she was just upfront that that's the view, that would be fine, right? I think it's just the name of the book, the focus on sex, the constant sort of promise or hinting at understanding the sex-based project, but then also like really weirdly contemplating the inclusion of men and things, and then really weirdly caring about the costs for men of believing women. And it's like, in what ways is this a feminist?
Yeah.
But it's not and then, okay, that helps a lot. It's not. It just it hasn't been in most of the chapters. Okay, well that actually helps a lot with
and most of what passes for feminism now isn't.
Yes. Right. So
they're Marxists or global justice warriors, as you say.
Yeah. And that makes it really hard to even detect how much some of this is letting women down, right? So I think what you said earlier was really perfect, right? Like, why is she not talking more about the construction of women's sexuality or sexual desire as subordinating? Like, why is that not the focus? Well, because that's not her. It's not her project, right? That's, and actually,
I know. I'm trying to think about like why does it bother me so much that it claims to be a feminist book, or that people will take it that way? I guess is it because the idea that women are qua women oppressed is so still nascent, precarious.
Yeah.
And here it is being erased again.
It is, yeah. I actually noted this bit where she's very explicit about that. I think it's 162. She says, a feminism that addresses only sexual oppression will pursue strategies that are of little use to women whose sex is just one cause of their political predicament. I mean, it could not be any more clear that she's thinking of women as people. And now there are all these people out there that are marginalized in various ways, and we should care about it.
Yeah.
This sexual thing that was the whole heart of feminism since its inception, right, is just gone. And now we're just caring about all these people, and sex is just one way that some of those people's lives go worse.
Yeah. And so then for her, it will be a failure of feminism if there are still women, post the feminist revolution suffering some hardship. Whereas I think, a feminist has to say, no, we're not against.
Yeah.
We're not against women suffering hardship, like full stop. We're against women being subordinated as women.
Yeah, exactly, on the basis of sex or things that have culturally related to sex. Exactly, and I think that is just, you're totally right, that point is just missing in mainstream feminism, right? Like, if the gender critical radical project is much narrower, and you could get to the feminist utopia and then there still be poverty and women suffering from poverty.
Marxism hasn't worked hard enough.
Yeah.
Or movements for racial justice haven't worked hard enough, or just haven't achieved their goals.
Yeah.
There will still be women in racial groups and women in class, in the working class.
Yeah.
Who are subordinated in other ways.
Yeah.
And then I guess feminists can join those movements
totally.
and work with them.
But it's incidental that those people are women, right? And like the thing that feminism on our conception cares about is the ways that women are made worse off as women for the reason of being women. In that future, they happen to be women, but they're subordinated on the basis of poverty or race, whatever it is. And I don't know, it's just, I don't know how there is not at least a discussion of, I guess this is a rhetoric thing, right? The fact that we don't just have it on the table, that there's benefit of having this narrower, more tightly circumscribed, clear constituency, clear movement feminism. And then there's this just like global justice for everyone. This one's more inclusive, this one's not, right? So we should talk about that a little bit, or what we mean by inclusive and what we're trying to realize. But why are those not just two interesting, narrower and broader, more feasible, more ridiculous views? Sorry, put that professionally. But why is that not just a normal conversation rather than like anyone who does this stuff is just a crazy bigot?
Yeah.
And this is the intersectional woke.
Yeah, and must be a privileged woman, which also for feminism is nonsensical, I think, right?
Yep.
If you really think that queer women are oppressed, then the idea of arranging women in a hierarchy is absurd.
Yeah.
Can you imagine Marx doing that?
Trying to rank the working
rank
class.
The workers.
No, exactly. No, or qua black, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense. No, I agree.
And he would have thought that's really sinister, in fact.
Good, because it's dividing people.
That's right,
solidarity from each other.
Yeah, Marx sort of said, no, that's the job of the capitalists to do that, to talk about how privileged some of the workers are.
Yeah. But this makes me curious about what you said about her sort of failure of imagination. Like, it makes me curious about whether the right explanation really is that she just... Is that just not even on her radar? Or is it on her radar and she rejects it because she buys into the thought? Yeah, I'm curious what...
I mean, I think at certain points in the book, she suggests that systems of oppression are interlocking, in which case you couldn't free women, queer women, without freeing everyone from all systems.
But they're interlocking and class is the winner? Because it really comes through in this essay that class for her is the thing,
It's a good point, yeah.
So maybe it's like they're sort of all interlocking after class, or the other ones then follow class and are interlocking, or I don't know. But I agree with, it's disappointing that this is feminism, right? Like this is Bloomsbury distributes this book widely, and people meet this book for the first time and think, okay, feminism, what have you got? And then it's like women are so relegated to, where are women in this?
Yes, I know, we're always the ones who should be thought about last. I feel like she almost at times exploits women's situation to tell us not to do anything about it, right? Like, women are so entangled with men or made so reliant on men that, we better not use the law to put men in jail, because then women, there's something really problematic about that.
Yeah, good. No, you're right about that discussion.
I was thinking too during that, I suppose this is one of the uncomfortable things to think about. is it the Marxists or critical theorists thought that what you have to do is, and Andrea Dworkin, and I'm sure said the same thing, what you have to do is really get the oppressed group to see that their back is against the wall. And
Yeah.
I guess at certain times I thought Srinivasan didn't seem to consider that possibility. Like, well, maybe doing some of these things will make women realize that their back is against the wall.
Yeah, good.
You know,
And we need
when their
that.
husbands are thrown in jail and they don't have any money.
Yeah. And that's what brings them together or brings them
Yeah,
into,
this is what your reality is.
yeah. Yeah,
You know,
what a miserable
like
choice.
it's not feminism is not forcing you here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
So what's our, for the person who has stayed with us through all of this rambling, what, do they buy the book? Do we think we had enough interesting thoughts as a result of this book that we're sort of glad we read it and thought about it? Do we recommend? Do we recommend this book? How do you feel?
Gosh, just saying, maybe I really had my hopes up after I read the Right to Sex essay and heard her talking about things like the formation of desire.
Yeah.
But I'm inclined to say women should just go and read that. They should go and read the feminist she cites. Go and read Ty Grace Atkinson and
Yeah.
Dworkin and McKinnon.
Yeah.
Maybe read the essay on not sleeping with your students.
Yeah, I agree. That definitely for me was the most interesting essay in the book.
Yeah.
And I think it's like maybe reading groups just help a lot because we like our friends, right? And so it's fun to get together and discuss things, even if you're slightly trashing them a bit.
Yeah.
So it can be enjoyable. There's definitely ideas to talk about, but I think we
Yeah, there are lots of things to talk about.
yeah, but we probably often felt frustrated, right, with all the rhetorical questions and the non-position
Yeah.
taking and having to like
Yeah.
try to work out what.
Just as something to receive, I'm not sure that I'd, something to prompt discussion, maybe. Read
Yeah,
it, but
yeah, good, right. That's different if people are just planning to read it and then that be that.
yeah.
Good. So actually, probably just read Firestone and Dworkin and T. Grayson.
What do you think?
Yeah, I probably agree. I don't regret reading it, but I do think a lot of my enjoyment came from you guys rather than from like the book itself.
Yeah.
Except for the Sleeping with Your Students chapter, which I
Yeah.
did get some new ideas. So, yeah. But it's been fun talking to you about it. So
You too.
thanks. And let's do this again soon with when your copy of Helen Joyce's book arrives.
Yeah.
And
that'd be
this
fun.
time we really mean it, don't we? We really mean it this time.
Yeah, provided my book gets here soon, Australia Post.
Awesome. Okay, bye.
See ya.